The moment Juniper Zeller's stomach cramped with hunger for the third day in a row, she knew she had reached the lowest point of her 22 years on Earth. The wild raspberries she'd found that morning in the thick Texas woods outside Gonzales had barely taken the edge off her desperation, and her fingers were stained purple from crushing them too eagerly into her mouth. It was August of 1878, and the heat bore down through the canopy of oak and pecan trees like the judgment she'd been running from for the past 3 weeks. She hadn't meant to end up alone in these woods, living like an animal. When her father had died of fever back in Missouri, leaving debts she couldn't pay, his business partner had made his intentions clear. Either she'd marry him, a man of 53 with tobacco-stained teeth and wandering hands, or he'd see her thrown in debtor's prison. So she'd done the only thing a desperate woman could do in 1878. She'd run. She'd taken what little money she'd hidden away, bought a train ticket south, and tried to disappear into Texas, where land was still wild enough to swallow a person whole. But money ran out faster than hope, and when the boarding house in Gonzales had demanded payment she couldn't provide, she'd slipped out in the night with nothing but the dress on her back and her mother's wedding ring sewn into the hem. For 3 weeks now, she'd been living in these woods, drinking from the creek, eating whatever she could forage, and trying not to think about what would become of her when winter came. The blackberries were getting scarce now, and she'd already learned the hard way which mushrooms would make her sick. Her dress hung loose on her frame, and she could count her ribs when she bathed in the creek. The August sun was merciless even in the shade, and she was always thirsty, always hungry, always afraid. That's when she saw him. Owen Oakley had been riding the fence line of his modest ranch when he spotted movement near the creek that ran through his property. At first he thought it was a deer, the way the figure moved through the underbrush with careful, quiet steps. But then he caught a flash of faded blue fabric, and he pulled his horse up short. His hand moved instinctively to the rifle on his saddle, but he didn't draw it. Out here, 5 miles from Gonzales, strangers were rare enough to warrant caution. Owen had lived on this land for 4 years now, ever since he'd turned 24 and used his savings to buy 200 acres of scrubland that everyone else thought was worthless. He'd proved them wrong, building it up with his own 2 hands into something that could sustain a man if that man didn't mind loneliness. "Hello there," he called out, his voice carrying across the distance. "This is private property." The figure froze, and Owen's eyes narrowed. Now that he was looking properly, he could see it was a woman, thin as a rail, her dark hair hanging loose and tangled past her shoulders. She looked like she'd been dragged through the woods backward, her dress torn and dirty, her feet bare. Juniper's heart hammered in her chest. She'd been so careful to avoid the ranch house she'd spotted from a distance, had made sure to stay on what she thought was unclaimed land. But apparently she'd miscalculated. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice hoarse from disuse. She hadn't spoken to another human being in 3 weeks. "I didn't know. I'll leave." But when she tried to take a step, her legs betrayed her. The world tilted sideways and she reached for a tree trunk to steady herself. Black spots danced in her vision. Owen was off his horse in an instant, covering the ground between them with long strides. Up close, he could see she wasn't just thin. She was starving. Her face was all sharp angles, her eyes too large, her lips cracked from the sun. Purple stains covered her fingers and mouth. "When's the last time you ate?" he demanded. Juniper tried to focus on him. He was tall, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His eyes were a striking blue-green, like the creek water in the morning light. He couldn't have been more than a few years older than her, but he looked at her with such concern that she felt tears prick her eyes. "This morning," she whispered. Berries? Jesus. Owen ran a hand through his hair. Before that, she couldn't remember. Yesterday, the day before, time had started to blur together. He made a decision then, the kind that would change both their lives forever, though neither of them knew it yet. "Come with me," he said, holding out his hand. "I've got food at the house. Real food." Juniper looked at his hand like it might be a trap. "I can't pay you, did I ask you to?" She swayed again, and this time he didn't wait for permission. He simply scooped her up in his arms like she weighed nothing. She was so light it made his chest ache. How long had she been out here starving? "Put me down," she protested weakly, but she didn't fight him. "Not a chance," he said, carrying her to his horse. "You'd fall on your face before you made it 10 feet. He settled her on the saddle and swung up behind her, keeping one arm around her waist to hold her steady. She smelled like the woods, like creek water and crushed berries and desperation. But underneath that, there was something else. Something that reminded him of lavender, faint but still there. The ride to his ranch house took 15 minutes, and Owen felt every one of them in the way she trembled against him. She kept trying to hold herself upright to maintain some dignity, but exhaustion won out and eventually she leaned back against his chest. "What's your name?" he asked, trying to keep her talking, keep her conscious. "Juniper." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Juniper Zeller. I'm Owen Oakley. This is my land you've been living on. I'm sorry. Stop apologizing, I'm not angry." The house came into view, a simple wooden structure with a covered porch and a stone chimney. It wasn't much, but Owen had built it himself and he was proud of it. There was a barn beside it, a chicken coop, a small corral where his other 2 horses stood in the shade. He helped Juniper down, and when her legs buckled, he caught her again. This time he carried her straight to the house and set her down in one of the 2 chairs at his kitchen table. "Don't move," he ordered, and then he was pulling food from his larder. Bread, butter, cold chicken from last night's dinner, a jar of preserves his neighbor had given him. He poured a glass of water from the pitcher and set it in front of her. Juniper stared at the food like she couldn't believe it was real. Her hands shook as she reached for the bread. "Slow," Owen warned. "You'll make yourself sick if you eat too fast." But she couldn't help herself. The first bite of bread with butter was the most delicious thing she'd ever tasted. She had to force herself to chew slowly, to swallow carefully. The water was cold and clean, so different from the creek water she'd been drinking. Owen watched her eat with a mixture of concern and anger. Not at her, but at whatever circumstances had brought her to this. A woman didn't end up alone in the woods, starving, unless something had gone terribly wrong. "How long have you been out there?" he asked quietly. Juniper swallowed another bite of bread. 3 weeks, maybe longer, alone," she nodded. "Why?" She looked up at him then, and he saw the fear in her eyes. "If I tell you, you might send me back." Owen pulled out the other chair and sat down across from her. "Try me." So she told him. About her father's death, about the debts, about the business partner who thought he could claim her along with everything else. About running to Texas, about the boarding house, about choosing the woods over whatever fate awaited her in town with no money and no prospects. "I know it's illegal," she said quietly, "leaving debts unpaid, but I couldn't marry him, I couldn't." Owen was quiet for a long moment, then he said, "Do you have any family, anyone who might help you?" "No. My mother died when I was 12. It was just my father and me, and now it's just me." "What about skills? Can you read and write?" She nodded. "My father made sure I had a good education. I can read, write, do figures. I used to help him with his bookkeeping." An idea was forming in Owen's mind. A crazy idea, maybe, but then again, he'd never been afraid of taking risks. That's how he'd ended up with this ranch in the first place. "I have a proposal," he said, "and I want you to really think about it before you answer." Juniper set down the chicken leg she'd been eating. "What kind of proposal?" I need help around here. The ranch is small, but it's growing. I've got cattle to tend, chickens, a garden that's more weeds than vegetables because I don't have time to deal with it. The house is a mess. I'm doing the work of 2 people and it shows." He leaned forward, his blue-green eyes intense. "You need a place to stay, food to eat, safety. I can offer you all that. In exchange, you help me run this place. Cooking, cleaning, tending the garden, whatever needs doing. It would be a business arrangement. You'd have your own room and I would never. I'd never expect anything improper from you. You have my word on that." Juniper stared at him. "You'd taken a stranger, just like that. You need help, I need help. Seems like we could help each other. But you don't know me. I could be a thief. I could be lying about everything." Owen smiled for the first time and it transformed his face. "Are you?" "No. But you don't know that. I'm a pretty good judge of character, and right now my character judgment says you're a woman who's had some bad luck and could use a break." He stood up and held out his hand again. "What do you say? Do we have a deal?" Juniper looked at his hand, at the calluses that spoke of hard work, at the honesty in his face. She thought about the woods, about the berries, about the slow starvation that awaited her if she went back. She thought about Missouri, about the business partner who was probably still looking for her, about a life that had crumbled to dust in her hands. And then she reached out and shook Owen Oakley's hand. "We have a deal." The first week was an adjustment for both of them. Owen showed Juniper to the spare room, which had been serving as storage. Together they cleared it out, and he brought in a bed frame he'd been meaning to repair. She insisted on helping, even though she was still weak from weeks of poor nutrition. He gave her clothes that had belonged to his mother, carefully preserved in a trunk. They were a bit old-fashioned from the 1860s, but they fit her better than her torn dress. When Juniper asked about his mother, Owen's face went tight. "She died 2 years ago. Influenza. My father followed 6 months later. They had a small place in town. I sold it to buy this land." "I'm sorry," Juniper said softly. "Me too." She wanted to ask if there was anyone else, any siblings, but something in his expression told her he was an only child, as alone in the world as she was. Owen was true to his word about keeping things proper. He never came into her room without knocking, never looked at her with anything but respect. At night, he slept in his own room at the opposite end of the small house, and he always made sure she knew she was safe. For her part, Juniper threw herself into the work. She attacked the neglected garden with determination, pulling weeds and coaxing the vegetables back to health. She cleaned the house from top to bottom, organized his chaotic kitchen, and started cooking meals that made Owen close his eyes in appreciation. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" he asked one evening over a dinner of pot roast with potatoes and carrots from the garden. "My mother. She said a woman should know how to make a good meal from whatever's on hand." Juniper smiled at the memory. "She could make magic out of nothing. She taught you well." They fell into a routine. Owen would rise before dawn to tend the cattle and horses, and Juniper would have breakfast waiting when he came in. They'd work through the morning, sometimes together, sometimes separately. Lunch was a quick affair, and then more work until evening. After dinner, they'd sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the Texas scrubland, talking about everything and nothing. Owen learned that Juniper loved to read but hadn't touched a book in months. The next time he went into Gonzales for supplies, he came back with 3 novels borrowed from the general store owner. Juniper learned that Owen had always dreamed of having a ranch, ever since he was a boy working on his uncle's farm in East Texas. He'd saved every penny for years to make it happen. "Why out here?" she asked. "This land must have been cheap for a reason." "Because everyone else thought it was worthless. Too dry, too rocky, too far from town, but I saw potential. There's water from the creek. The grass is better than it looks, and the land is mine. No one to tell me what to do or how to do it. She could hear the pride in his voice, and she understood it. He'd built something from nothing, just like she was trying to do. As the weeks passed, something shifted between them. It was subtle at first. The way Owen's hand would linger when he passed her something at dinner. The way Juniper found herself watching him work, admiring the strength in his arms as he mended a fence or the concentration on his face as he repaired a saddle. They were careful not to acknowledge it. They had an arrangement, a business deal. Anything else would complicate things. But the heart doesn't care about business arrangements. One evening in early September, about a month after Juniper had arrived, a storm rolled in fast and fierce. Owen had been working on the barn roof when the first drops fell, and he'd barely made it inside before the sky opened up. Juniper had dinner ready, and they ate by lamplight as rain hammered against the windows and thunder shook the walls. The storm was violent, the kind that reminded people how small they were against nature's fury. "I hope the cattle are all right," Owen said, staring out into the darkness. "You can't go out in this, you'll be struck by lightning. I know, doesn't stop me worrying." A particularly loud crack of thunder made Juniper jump, and Owen noticed. "You're afraid of storms." "Not afraid exactly, just, they make me nervous. When I was in the woods, storms were the worst. Everything would be muddy and cold, and I'd try to find shelter under the thickest trees, but I'd always end up soaked anyway." Without thinking, Owen reached across the table and took her hand. "You're safe now. The roof doesn't leak. The walls are solid. Nothing's going to happen to you here." Juniper looked down at their joined hands, at the way his thumb was unconsciously stroking her knuckles. When she looked up, Owen's eyes were on her face, and there was something in them that made her breath catch. "Juniper," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something." "What?" But he shook his head, seeming to think better of it. "Never mind, we should probably get some sleep. Storm should pass by morning." But Juniper didn't let go of his hand. "Owen, what were you going to say?" He met her eyes again, and this time he didn't look away. "This arrangement we have. This business deal. It's getting harder for me to think of it that way." Her heart started to pound. "What do you mean?" "I mean that somewhere along the way, having you here stopped being about needing help with the ranch. I look forward to seeing you at breakfast. I think about you when I'm out working. When you smile at something I've said, it's the best part of my day." He took a breath. "I'm falling for you, Juniper. Maybe I already have." The rain continued to pour outside, but inside the small house, there was only silence. Juniper's hand trembled in his. "I know I shouldn't have said anything," Owen continued. "I promised this would just be a business arrangement, and here I am breaking that promise. If you want to leave, I'll give you money to get started somewhere else. I'll write you a reference, whatever you need." "Stop," Juniper said. "Just stop talking for a minute." Owen fell silent, waiting. "You know what I think about when I'm working in the garden?" Juniper asked. "I think about how lucky I am that you found me that day. How easily you could have just ridden past, or run me off your property. But instead you showed me kindness I didn't deserve. And then I think about how you laugh at my terrible jokes, and how you always make sure I eat enough at dinner, and how you brought me those books even though I never asked." She stood up, still holding his hand, and pulled him to his feet. "I'm falling for you too, Owen Oakley. I've been trying not to because I didn't think it was proper, didn't think it could be real. But it is real, isn't it?" "Yes," he breathed. "It's real." He lifted his free hand and cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing against her skin. "Can I kiss you, please?" The first kiss was soft, tentative testing. But when Juniper's hands came up to grip his shirt, when she rose up on her toes to get closer, it deepened into something more. Owen's arms came around her waist, pulling her flush against him, and she could feel the rapid beating of his heart matching her own. When they finally broke apart, Both breathing hard, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this right. I want to court you properly, not just steal kisses in the kitchen." Juniper laughed, a sound of pure joy. "We're a bit past that, don't you think? I'm already living in your house. Doesn't matter. You deserve to be courted. You deserve flowers and compliments and all the things a woman should get when a man's trying to win her heart. You already have my heart. Then I'll work to keep it." The storm passed, and in its wake came a golden autumn. Owen was true to his word about courting her properly. He brought her wildflowers from the far pasture. He took her into Gonzales in the wagon, and they attended a church social where he introduced her as Miss Zeller, a friend helping him with the ranch. If people gossiped about the propriety of the arrangement, they did it quietly enough that Owen and Juniper could ignore it. They stole moments together. Kisses in the barn when Owen came to collect eggs, held hands on the porch after dinner. Long conversations under the stars about their hopes and dreams, and the future they were both starting to imagine together. Owen told her about wanting to expand the ranch, about buying more cattle and maybe some sheep, about building a bigger house someday, one with a proper parlor and a real dining room. Juniper told him about wanting to start a lending library in Gonzales, about teaching children to read, about having a family of her own someday, something she'd thought she'd lost the chance for when she ran from Missouri. "How many children?" Owen asked, kissing her temple as they sat together on the porch swing he'd built. "At least 3. Maybe 4. I always hated being an only child." "4 sounds good to me. 2 boys and 2 girls. So you can plan that, can you?" she teased. "I can try." She swatted his arm, laughing, and he caught her hand and kissed her palm. These moments felt stolen from time itself, precious and perfect, but perfection never lasts forever. It was late October when trouble arrived. Owen had gone into town for supplies, and Juniper was hanging laundry when she heard the sound of horses approaching. 2 men rode up, both strangers, both wearing the kind of clothes that spoke of money and city living. Neither belonged on a Texas ranch. "Can I help you?" Juniper asked, her hand automatically going to the pocket where she kept a small knife. The older of the 2 men, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, dismounted. "We're looking for someone." A young woman, about 22 years old, dark hair. "She ran away from Missouri about 4 months ago. You wouldn't happen to have seen anyone matching that description, would you?" Juniper's blood ran cold. She forced herself to keep her voice steady. "This is a working ranch. We don't get many visitors." "That's not what I asked." The man took a step closer. "There's a reward for information leading to her return. Significant money. A man could do a lot with that kind of money." "I'm sorry, I can't help you." The second man, younger and meaner looking, spoke up. "Funny thing is, the lady at the boarding house in Gonzales remembers a woman matching that description. Said she disappeared one night without paying. Then we asked around more, and someone mentioned Owen Oakley's got a woman living out here with him. Now what are the odds of that?" Juniper's mind raced. She could run, but they'd catch her. She could fight, but there were 2 of them. She could lie, but they already knew. "My name is Juniper Zeller," she said, lifting her chin, "and I'm not going back to Missouri." The older man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That's not really your choice, Miss Zeller. You see, I represent certain interests back in Missouri. Debts that need to be paid. A business partner who's very eager to see you return. I'll pay the debts myself. However much my father owed, I'll find a way." "With what money?" "You're living on charity out here from what I can see." The man gestured at the modest ranch. "No, I think you'll be coming with us." That's when Owen rode into the yard, his wagon loaded with supplies. He took in the scene in an instant. Juniper backed against the clothesline, 2 strangers looming over her, the fear in her eyes. He was off the wagon in a heartbeat, his hand on the gun at his hip. "Get away from her." The younger man laughed. "Or what, cowboy? You going to shoot us for having a conversation?" "If that conversation involves threatening a woman on my property, yes." The older man held up his hands in a placating gesture. "No need for violence. We're just here to collect Miss Zeller and return her to Missouri. This doesn't concern you." "The hell it doesn't. She's under my protection." "Protection?" The younger man looked between them and laughed again. "That what they're calling it these days? You're shacked up with her, plain and simple." Owen's face went hard. "Watch your mouth." "We have the legal right to bring her back," the older man said. "Debtor's law. She ran from legitimate obligations." "How much?" Owen demanded. "Excuse me. How much does she owe? I'll pay it right now. Clear her debts and you can ride back to Missouri empty-handed." The older man named a figure that made Juniper gasp. It was more than she'd imagined, inflated beyond reason. Her father's business partner had clearly added charges. Owen didn't hesitate. "Done. I'll have the money drafted from my account in town. You'll have it by tomorrow." "Owen, no," Juniper said. "That's too much. I can't let you. You're not letting me do anything. It's my choice." He kept his eyes on the two men. "Well, do we have a deal?" The older man considered, then shook his head. "The problem is, it's not just about the money anymore. Certain parties back in Missouri feel they've been wronged. They want assurances that Miss Zeller will face consequences for her actions." "What kind of consequences?" "The kind that involve marriage to the man she was promised to, or jail time for debt evasion. Those are her choices." Owen's gun was out of its holster before anyone could blink, pointed steady at the older man's chest. "Here's a third choice. You get back on your horses and ride out of Texas. You tell whoever sent you that Juniper Zeller is no longer available. And if anyone comes looking for her again, they'll deal with me." The younger man went for his own gun, but Owen was faster, firing a shot that kicked up dirt at the man's feet. "Don't. You're making a big mistake," the older man said, but he was already backing toward his horse. "This isn't over." "Yeah, it is. Now get out." They rode off, and Owen didn't lower his gun until they were specks in the distance. Then he turned to Juniper and she saw his hands were shaking. "Are you all right?" he asked. She nodded, then shook her head, then burst into tears. Owen pulled her into his arms, holding her tight while she sobbed against his chest. "I'm sorry," she gasped between tears. "I'm so sorry. I brought this to your door. They could have killed you." Hey, look at me." He tilted her face up. "I knew what I was doing, and I meant what I said. They're not taking you anywhere." "But the money." "Owen, you can't spend that much on me. It's your savings, everything you've worked for. And what good is any of it without you?" He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "We'll figure it out. We always do." That night, after they'd secured the house and made sure the men were truly gone, Owen brought Juniper into the parlor and sat her down on the old sofa. "I had a plan," he said. "I was going to wait until Christmas. I was going to do this properly with a ring and everything. But today showed me that we don't always get to choose our timing." He got down on one knee and Juniper's breath caught. "I don't have a ring yet. I'll get you one, the prettiest one in all of Texas. But I need to ask you now, tonight, while I still have the courage." He took both her hands in his. "Juniper Zeller, I love you. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you hum while you're cooking. I love how you've made this house a home. I love you so much it scares me sometimes." "Owen," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Will you marry me? Not because of those men, not because you need protection. Marry me because you love me too. Marry me because you want to spend your life with me, building something together. Will you?" "Yes," she said. "Yes, yes, yes." He stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the pent-up emotion of the day. When they finally broke apart, they were both laughing and crying at the same time. "We should go to town tomorrow," Owen said. "Talk to the preacher, make it official as soon as possible. Your neighbors are going to talk. Let them talk. You'll be my wife. That's all that matters." They were married 3 days later in a simple ceremony at the church in Gonzales. Owen wore his best suit, and Juniper wore a dress that the general store owner's wife had helped her sew from fabric Owen had insisted on buying. It was pale blue, the color of a clear Texas sky, and when Owen saw her walking down the aisle, his eyes grew bright with unshed tears. The ceremony was short, the vows traditional, but when Owen kissed his bride, there wasn't a dry eye in the small church. Even the preacher had to clear his throat several times. They held a small reception at the ranch, with neighbors bringing food and well wishes. Someone brought a fiddle, and there was dancing in the yard as the sun set. Owen held Juniper in his arms and waltzed her around, not caring that they were both terrible dancers, not caring about anything except the feel of her hand in his and the gold ring on her finger that he'd bought with the last of his spare money. "Happy, Mrs. Oakley?" he asked. "Happier than I ever thought possible, Mr. Oakley." Their wedding night was tender and sweet, a mixture of nervous laughter and whispered endearments. Owen was gentle, patient, making sure Juniper felt safe and loved every moment. And when they finally lay tangled together in his bed, their bed now, she traced the line of his jaw with her finger and marveled at how much her life had changed in just a few months. "I was starving in the woods," she whispered. "I thought I was going to die out there, and then you found me." "Best day of my life," Owen said, kissing her shoulder. "Finding you, you offered me your table and your heart. And you took them both. Now I'm the luckiest man in Texas." The first year of their marriage wasn't easy. Owen had to take a loan from the bank to cover the debts he'd paid off for Juniper, which meant tightening their belts considerably. They ate simply, rarely went to town, and worked from sunrise to sunset to keep the ranch afloat. But they were happy. More than happy. They were building a life together. Every fence post and planted seed a testament to their partnership. Juniper proved to have a head for business. She started keeping detailed records of their expenses and income, finding ways to save money that Owen had never thought of. She also started a small side business selling eggs and vegetables in town, which brought in extra income. Owen expanded their cattle herd slowly but surely, and by the end of their first year together, the ranch was finally starting to turn a real profit. He paid off half the bank loan, and the banker told him at this rate, he'd be clear of debt within another 18 months. But the best news came in early spring of 1880. Juniper had been feeling poorly for a few weeks, tired and queasy in the mornings. At first she thought it was something she'd eaten, but when the symptoms persisted, she rode into town to see the doctor. She was pregnant. Owen was in the barn when she came home, and she could barely contain herself long enough to dismount. She ran to him and he caught her, laughing at her enthusiasm. "What's got you so excited?" he asked. "We're going to have a baby," she said, and watched his face transform with joy. He picked her up and spun her around, whooping loud enough to startle the horses. Then he set her down carefully, suddenly worried. "Are you all right? Should you be riding? What did the doctor say?" "The doctor said I'm healthy as can be. The baby should come in October." "October." Owen placed his hand on her still flat stomach. Our baby, she confirmed. The pregnancy was relatively easy, and Juniper worked almost until the day she went into labor. Owen became comically overprotective, trying to keep her from doing any heavy lifting, but she waved him off. Women had been having babies since the dawn of time, she reminded him. She wasn't made of glass. Still, he couldn't help worrying. He'd already lost so many people he loved. The thought of anything happening to Juniper or the baby terrified him in ways he couldn't express. But on October 15th, 1880, after a labor that lasted 12 hours and had Owen pacing holes in the porch, Juniper delivered a healthy baby boy. They named him Oliver, after Owen's father. Owen held his son for the first time and felt his heart crack open in a whole new way. Oliver was perfect, with a shock of dark hair in his mother's eyes. When the baby wrapped his tiny hand around Owen's finger, Owen knew he'd do anything, face any danger, overcome any obstacle to keep this child safe. "He's beautiful," Juniper said tiredly from the bed. The birth had been hard, but she'd come through it well. "Just like his father, he has your eyes. Thank goodness. Your eyes might be too intense for a baby." Owen laughed and brought the baby to her. "Here, I think he's hungry." Those first few months were sleepless and chaotic, but also filled with more joy than either of them had known was possible. Oliver was a good baby, rarely fussy, and as he grew, his personality started to emerge. He was curious about everything, always watching, always learning. By the time Oliver was a year old, the ranch was thriving. Owen had paid off the bank loan completely and even hired a young man from town to help with the heavy work. This gave him more time to spend with his family, which was all he really wanted. Juniper started her lending library in town, just a small collection of books in a corner of the general store, but it was a start. People loved it, and she loved being able to share her passion for reading with others. Life was good, better than good. It was everything they dreamed of and more. When Oliver was 2, Juniper discovered she was pregnant again. This time Owen was slightly less panicked, though he still fretted over her constantly. Their second child, a daughter they named Iris, arrived in the spring of 1883. She had her father's blue-green eyes and her mother's dark hair, and from the moment she was born, she had Owen wrapped around her little finger. "You're going to spoil her," Juniper said, watching Owen rock the baby for the third time that night. "Impossible. You can't spoil a baby with love." "That's not what you said when Oliver was this age. Oliver's different. He's a boy. He needs to be tough." But even as he said it, Owen knew it was nonsense. He'd spoiled Oliver just as much, and his son had turned out perfectly fine. They settled into a new rhythm as a family of 4. Oliver was a natural big brother, always wanting to help with the baby. He'd bring her toys and tell her stories in his toddler babble, and Iris would watch him with adoring eyes. The years passed in a blur of work and laughter and love. The ranch continued to grow, and eventually Owen was able to build the bigger house he'd promised Juniper all those years ago. It had a proper parlor, a dining room, 4 bedrooms, and a wraparound porch that Juniper had specifically requested. The day they moved in, Owen carried Juniper over the threshold even though she protested that she was 30 years old and perfectly capable of walking. "Humor me," he said, kissing her. "I didn't get to do this with our first house. You carried me into our first house. I was half dead from starvation, but you still carried me." "Well then, this is just tradition." Their children grew. Oliver became a serious boy who loved working with the cattle and horses. He had his father's quiet strength and his mother's intelligence. Iris was a wild child, always covered in dirt from exploring, always asking questions about everything. She kept them on their toes. When Oliver was 10 and Iris was 8, Juniper discovered she was pregnant again. She was 35, and the doctor warned her that this pregnancy might be harder than the previous ones. But Juniper was determined, and Owen stood by her every step of the way. Their third child, another boy they named Oscar, was born in the winter of 1891. The birth was difficult, and for a few terrifying hours, Owen thought he might lose Juniper. But she pulled through, stubborn and strong as always. Oscar was a sweet baby, gentle and calm compared to his energetic siblings. He had Owen's hair and Juniper's smile, and he completed their family in a way neither parent had realized was missing. The ranch continued to prosper through the 1890s. Owen's reputation for quality cattle spread, and he was able to command good prices. He bought more land, expanding their holdings until they had over 500 acres. It was more than he'd ever dreamed possible when he'd started with 200 acres of scrubland. Juniper's lending library had grown too. It now occupied its own small building in Gonzales, funded by donations from townspeople who appreciated what she'd created. She spent 2 days a week in town, helping people find books, teaching children to read, and loving every minute of it. Their children thrived. Oliver, at 15, was already taller than his father and showed every sign of taking over the ranch someday. He had a gift with horses that amazed everyone who saw him work. Iris, at 13, was torn between helping her mother with the library and learning to rope cattle with her father. She was fierce and independent, and Juniper saw so much of herself in her daughter. Oscar, at 4, was the baby of the family and enjoyed all the attention that came with it. One evening in the summer of 1895, Owen and Juniper sat on the porch of their big house, watching the sun set over their land. The children were inside, supposedly getting ready for bed but more likely playing. The sounds of their laughter drifted through the open windows. "Remember that first night?" Juniper asked, her hand in Owen's. "When you brought me here and fed me bread and butter? I remember thinking you were the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen, even half-starved and covered in dirt." She laughed. "Liar. I looked terrible. You looked like hope." He squeezed her hand. "I'd been so lonely, Juniper. I hadn't even realized how lonely until you were suddenly there, filling up all the empty spaces. I was terrified. I thought you might turn out to be some kind of villain, luring me in with false kindness. And instead, I was just a lonely cowboy who fell in love with you over pot roast and wildflowers." Juniper leaned her head on his shoulder. "Best decision I ever made, shaking your hand that first day. Second best. What was the best? Saying yes when I proposed." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out one by one. After all these years, Owen still felt the same way he had that stormy night when he'd first confessed his feelings, maybe even more so. Juniper was woven into every part of his life, his heart, his soul. She was the foundation on which he'd built everything. "I love you," he said, because he never got tired of saying it. "I love you too," she replied, because she never got tired of hearing it. Inside, Oscar appeared at the screen door. "Papa, Oliver says I have to go to bed, but I'm not tired." Owen stood, pulling Juniper up with him. "Come on, little man. Let's see if we can't find a bedtime story in that library your mama keeps." They went inside together to the house full of children and laughter and life, to the future they'd built from nothing but determination and love. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Oliver fell in love with a rancher's daughter from the next county over, and in 1898, at the age of 21, he married her in the same church where Owen and Juniper had wed. The ceremony was bigger, fancier, but the love was just as real. Oliver and his wife, Margaret, built their own home on the far edge of the ranch property. Within a year, they'd made Owen and Juniper grandparents with the birth of a baby girl. "I'm too young to be a grandfather," Owen protested, though he couldn't stop grinning as he held his granddaughter. "You're 43, Juniper said. That's a perfectly reasonable age. Still feels strange." But he took to grandparenthood like he'd taken to everything else, with wholehearted dedication. He spoiled his granddaughter shamelessly, carving toys for her and telling her stories about the old days. Iris surprised everyone by announcing she wanted to go to college. It was 1900, and women were starting to do such things, though it was still unusual. She wanted to study literature and library science to expand on what her mother had started. "Are you sure?" Juniper asked. "It won't be easy. People will have opinions." "Let them," Iris said with the same fierce determination her mother had shown when she'd refused to return to Missouri. "I know what I want." So they sent her to college in Austin, and she thrived there. She wrote long letters home about her classes, her friends, her dreams. She graduated in 1904 with honors and returned to Gonzales to take over the library from Juniper, who was ready to spend more time at home. Oscar, at 13, showed signs of having inherited his mother's head for business. He was the one who suggested they start breeding horses in addition to cattle, and his instincts proved correct. The horses brought in good money and diversified their income. In 1905, when Owen was 50 and Juniper was 48, they celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary. Their children threw them a party at the ranch, inviting everyone they'd ever known. The yard was full of people, music, food, and joy. Owen danced with Juniper under strings of lanterns, and she smiled up at him with the same warmth she'd had at 22. 25 years, he said. Where did the time go? Into building this, she gestured at everything around them. The ranch, the family, the life they'd created. Into making something beautiful out of what started as two desperate people trying to survive. You were surviving on wild berries in the woods, and you offered me your table and your heart. Best offer I ever made. They kissed, and their children groaned good-naturedly about their parents being romantic. Their grandchildren, 3 of them now, ran around their legs laughing. That night, after everyone had gone home or gone to bed, Owen and Juniper walked out to the creek where he'd first found her. The place was unchanged, still as peaceful and beautiful as it had been that August day in 1878. "Sometimes I can't believe this is my life," Juniper said softly. "When I was out here alone, eating berries and drinking creek water, I couldn't imagine a future. I thought I'd die out here or end up in jail or trapped in a loveless marriage. I never imagined this." "What this specifically?" Owen teased. 50 acres, 3 kids, and a husband who still can't dance. "This happiness," she said seriously. "This peace. This feeling of being exactly where I belong." Owen pulled her close. "You belong with me. You've always belonged with me, even before we met. We were just 2 pieces waiting to find each other. That's very poetic for a cowboy. I have my moments." They stood there by the creek, holding each other, listening to the night sounds of the Texas scrubland. Crickets and frogs, the distant call of an owl, the gentle rustling of leaves in the evening breeze. "Let's make a promise," Juniper said. "Let's never forget what it took to get here. The hunger, the fear, the risk. Let's never take this for granted." "I promise," Owen said. "Though I don't think I could ever forget. You're in everything I see, every meal we share, every sunset we watch, every night we go to sleep in the same bed. You're my whole world, Juniper. You always will be." More years passed, bringing changes and constants in equal measure. Oliver's family grew to include 2 more children. Iris married a professor from Austin and moved back to Gonzales with him, much to everyone's delight. They had no children, but they poured their love into the library and into the community. Oscar, when he turned 21 in 1908, married a girl from town and built yet another house on the ranch property. The Oakley Ranch became something of a dynasty, known throughout the county for quality livestock and honest dealing. Owen trained his sons in everything he knew, and they proved to be worthy successors. He also made sure his daughter had equal knowledge. Iris might have chosen a different path, but she knew how to run a ranch as well as her brothers did. Owen had learned from Juniper that strength came in many forms, and he made sure all his children knew their own worth. Juniper continued her work with the library until she was well into her 60s. Even after she officially retired, she couldn't stay away. She'd show up several times a week to read to children or help with the cataloging. It was her passion, and everyone knew it. Owen never fully retired. He was still riding out to check the cattle well into his 60s, though Oliver and Oscar did most of the heavy work now. He couldn't imagine not being active, not being part of the daily rhythm of the ranch. This land was in his blood. In 1920, Owen turned 65 and Juniper turned 63. The world had changed dramatically since that day in 1878 when he'd found her in the woods. Automobiles were replacing horses in town, though not on the ranch. The Great War had come and gone, though thankfully their children had been too young or too old to fight. The country was moving into a new era, faster and louder than anything their younger selves could have imagined, but their love remained constant. On a cool evening in October of 1920, exactly 40 years after Oliver's birth, Owen and Juniper sat on their porch with a blanket wrapped around both of them. They'd done this thousands of times, but it never got old. This was their spot, their ritual, their time. "What are you thinking about?" Juniper asked. "That first storm," Owen said. "When I told you I was falling for you, remember how scared I was that you'd leave?" "I remember. I was scared too, scared that what I was feeling wasn't real, couldn't last. And now I know better. What we have is the realest thing I've ever known." Owen kissed her temple. "I found you at the lowest point of your life and you let me help you. You could have been proud, could have refused, but you took my hand. You offered it at the lowest point of yours, even if you didn't realize it. You were so lonely, Owen, so isolated. We saved each other." "Yeah," he agreed quietly. "We did." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the sounds of their grown children in various parts of the ranch property. Oliver's youngest was practicing the fiddle, the sound carrying through the evening air. Iris and her husband were having dinner at Oscar's house, their laughter floating up occasionally. The ranch was alive with family, with love, with the legacy they'd built. "No regrets?" Owen asked. "Not a single one," Juniper said firmly. "You. Only that I didn't find you sooner. We found each other at exactly the right time. Not a moment before, not a moment after. She was right, as she usually was. If Owen had found her earlier, she might not have been running from Missouri. If he'd found her later, she might not have survived. Timing mattered, and theirs had been perfect. The years that followed were gentler, slower. Owen and Juniper both struggled with the aches and pains of aging, but they did it together. They took walks instead of rides, short strolls instead of long hikes. They spent more time sitting on the porch, watching the world go by, content in each other's company. Their grandchildren grew up and started having children of their own. Great-grandchildren toddled around the ranch, and Owen would sit in his chair on the porch and watch them with wonder. All of this, all these people, had come from two desperate souls who'd found each other by chance and chosen to build a life together. In 1928, when Owen was 73 and Juniper was 70, they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary. The party was even bigger than the 25th, with family coming from all over Texas. There were over 30 people who could trace their existence directly to Owen and Juniper's love story. During the party, Oliver gave a toast. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass, "who taught us that love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice you make every single day." They've chosen each other for 50 years, through good times and hard times, and they're still choosing each other. That's what I want all of us to remember. Love is the choice to stay, to work, to build something together. Thank you, Mama and Papa, for showing us how it's done. There wasn't a dry eye in the house. That night, as they prepared for bed in the room they'd shared for 47 years, Juniper looked at Owen in the lamplight. He was old now, his hair gray and his face lined, but he was still the same man who'd offered her bread and butter when she'd been starving. He was still the man who'd gotten down on one knee without a ring. He was still the man who looked at her like she hung the moon. "I love you, Owen Oakley," she said. "I will love you until the day I die and beyond. I love you too, Juniper Oakley. You're the best thing that ever happened to me." They climbed into bed together, and Owen held her close the way he'd done for 50 years. Her head fit perfectly in the hollow of his shoulder. His hand rested on her hip. They fit together like two pieces of a puzzle made for each other. The years continued their steady march. Owen's health began to decline first. His heart wasn't as strong as it used to be, and the doctor in Gonzales told him to take it easy. He tried for Juniper's sake, but it was hard. He'd been active his whole life. Juniper stayed strong longer, but eventually time caught up with her too. Her joints ached, her vision wasn't what it used to be, and she tired easily. But her mind stayed sharp, and her love for Owen never wavered. They spent more and more time in the big house, surrounded by family. Someone was always visiting, always checking on them. They were never alone, never forgotten. The legacy they'd built took care of them the way they'd taken care of it for so many years. One evening in early spring of 1932, when Owen was 77 and feeling particularly nostalgic, he asked Oscar to hitch up the wagon. "I want to go to the creek," he said. "The place where I found your mother. Pa, it's getting dark. Why don't we wait until tomorrow?" "Tomorrow's not guaranteed at my age, son. I want to go tonight." So Oscar helped his parents into the wagon, and they made the slow journey to the creek. Juniper understood why Owen wanted to come here. They hadn't been back in years, and there was something poetic about returning to where it all began. Owen helped Juniper down from the wagon, and they stood by the creek bank, holding hands. The place had changed very little. The water still bubbled over the rocks, the trees still provided shade, the evening birds still sang. "This is where I saw you," Owen said. "Right over there, moving through the trees like a ghost. I thought you were a deer at first. And I thought you were going to run me off the property. Instead, I fell in love with you. It took more than a day," Juniper reminded him, smiling. "The seeds were planted that day. The rest was just them taking root and growing." They stood in silence for a long moment, remembering her desperation, his loneliness, the unexpected grace of their meeting. Remembering the choice they'd made to trust each other, to build something together, to love with everything they had. "I was surviving on wild berries in these woods," Juniper said softly. "I was so lost, Owen. So scared. And then you appeared like an answer to a prayer I hadn't even known how to pray. You changed my life," Owen said. "You took my house and made it a home. You took my loneliness and filled it with love. Everything good in my life traces back to you. We did it together." "We did it together," he agreed. They stood by the creek until the stars came out, and then Oscar drove them home. They were tired but content, having made their pilgrimage to the place where their story had begun. Owen died peacefully in his sleep 3 months later, with Juniper holding his hand. He was 77 years old, and he'd lived a life full of love, family, and purpose. His funeral was attended by over 100 people, all of whom had been touched by his kindness and integrity. Juniper mourned him deeply, but she also celebrated the life they'd shared. 54 years of marriage, 3 children, 8 grandchildren, and 12 great-grandchildren. A successful ranch that would continue for generations. A love story that had started with wild berries and an offered hand, and had grown into something that would outlast both of them. She lived another 3 years, surrounded by family, still sharp and engaged even as her body grew frail. She spent her days reading, visiting with her children and grandchildren, and talking about Owen. She never tired of telling their story, of remembering the lonely cowboy who'd offered his table and his heart to a desperate woman in the woods. Juniper died in her sleep in October of 1935, on the 55th anniversary of Oliver's birth. She was 78 years old. When they went through her things, they found a letter she'd written to be read at her funeral. Iris read it aloud, her voice shaking with emotion. "To my beloved children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren," it began. "By the time you hear this, I will be gone, reunited with your father, grandfather, and great-grandfather in whatever comes next. I want you to know that I lived the most extraordinary life, not because of wealth or fame, but because of love. When I was 22, I was starving in the woods, certain I would die. And then a cowboy found me, and instead of turning me away, he offered me his table. And then, miracle of miracles, he offered me his heart. I took both, and they sustained me for the rest of my life. Your father was the best man I ever knew. He was kind, strong, honorable, and loving. He built something from nothing, and he did it through hard work and faith. But more than that, he loved me every single day of our marriage, through good times and hard times, in sickness and in health. He kept every vow he made to me. I want you all to know that what we had is possible. Real love, lasting love is possible. It takes work and patience and the willingness to choose each other every single day. But it's worth it. Oh, my darlings, it's so worth it. Take care of each other. Build something beautiful. And remember that everything you have, everything you are, comes from love. Never forget that. With all my heart, Juniper Oakley." There wasn't a dry eye at the funeral. Juniper was buried next to Owen on a hill overlooking the ranch, where they could watch over the land they'd built together for eternity. The ranch continued to thrive, passed down through the generations. The story of Owen and Juniper became family legend, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations. It became a reminder of what love could build, of what two people could create when they chose each other against all odds. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, family members would walk down to the creek where it all began. They'd stand by the water and think about the woman who'd been surviving on wild berries, and the lonely cowboy who'd offered his table and his heart. They'd think about the choice that had been made that day, the trust that had been given and received, the love that had grown from desperate beginnings into something that would last forever. The legacy of Owen and Juniper Oakley lived on, not just in the land and the cattle and the buildings, but in every act of kindness, every offered hand, every heart open to love. They had shown their family, and anyone who heard their story, that it was never too late for grace, never too late to be saved, never too late to find the love that would transform everything. In the end, that was their greatest gift. Not the ranch, not the wealth they'd accumulated, but the proof that love could triumph over desperation, that kindness could change lives, that two broken people could come together and create something whole. The story of the woman surviving on wild berries and the lonely cowboy who found her became a testament to hope, to the power of offering help when it's needed most, and to the extraordinary things that can grow from the smallest acts of compassion. It was a love story for the ages, born in the Wild West of 1878, and living on in the hearts of all who heard it, forever and always.